Hello and welcome to our weekly IG Live. I am excited today to be talking to a longtime member of Multicultural Kid Blogs, and hopefully she can tell us how to pronounce her last name. It's Mariam Ottimofiore, so she can help us with that pronunciation. But she is a Pakistani expat author, writer, researcher, and economist, and I see she's already on here. It's helpful for expat families, for multilingual, multicultural families, and it's called The Messy Mobile Life. We'll talk to her about what does that mean exactly. Hello.
Hi, Leanna. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time to talk with us and figuring out the time difference, which is always tricky. It's 11 o'clock in the morning
here. In my head, and I thought I'm just gonna write it out for other people because I know it's Monday, and
I appreciate that because I've actually had some people tell me that they've missed our IG lives before because of making mistakes, especially the US. I know we do the daylight savings, so depending on what time of year, it might be different. But anyway, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. And can you please say your name for me because I wasn't sure how to pronounce it.
Oh, sure. My name is Mariam Navaid Ottimofiore, and the last name is Italian, so I know it trips up a lot of people. In it, call me Mrs. Best Flower.
Nice. Well, sorry, you're breaking up for me a little bit. You say your friends just call you what?
I think I lost you there as well. Mrs. Best Flower. That's what Ottimofiore means. But no worries, you said that perfectly well. So.
Oh, good. Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for those that don't know you and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. My name is Mariam. I'm a Pakistani author, writer, researcher, speaker, and economist in a nutshell. My early childhood was spent moving between Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the United States, and Pakistan. So I kind of grew up in these three places, and then had a long period of time in Pakistan, spent my teenage years there. So feel very Pakistani as a result of, spending my most formative years there. But then when I was 19 years old, I decided to go abroad, live abroad by myself. I had a one-way ticket in my hand, and I arrived at Boston's Logan Airport with just, one blue suitcase and ready to start my new adventure in life. And I guess, that was the start of my messy mobile life. I then continued studying in the US, moved to the UK, came back to the US, so I went back and forth. And then, of course, in the UK, I met my half German, half Italian husband, which continued a life of moving for us. So I moved to Germany. I lived in Berlin, Germany. After that, I moved to Copenhagen, Denmark, lived there. After Copenhagen, we moved to Singapore, lived there. After Singapore, we moved to Dubai. I lived there. After Dubai, we moved to Ghana. And after Ghana, we moved to Portugal. So I'm currently in Portugal. It's country number 10. And this is where I'm sitting talking to you from my home. I live just outside of Lisbon in a seaside town called Cascais. So that's, in a nutshell, all the moving around that I have done. But I think it's important to point out that, I'm an expert at getting lost in every new city that I've called home. I'm an expert at butchering every new language that I try to master because there have been so many of those. And I can never remember my own, phone number or my own address. And I cannot make my morning coffee without plugging my kitchen appliances into an international adapter. So that is me in a nutshell.
I love it. And I just want to give a shout out to one of the articles. You've written several articles for which are very popular. And one of them is getting ready for the next new place that you have to move to, because that can be so challenging. You have to go, and a lot of times it may not be a place that you've chosen to go to, or maybe not your first choice. And so I know you've shared that in your stories, and we have it, of course, on the blog. If anybody wants to go back and look at that. But I want to take a step back and talk about just your childhood, because one of the things I think is so fascinating about you is one, not just how many countries you've lived in, but that you started doing it from the very beginning. And does that, so you're not only raising third culture kids, but you were one yourself. Did that give you more insight than, say, somebody who just grew up in one country and then they're trying to raise kids who are having this whole different experience? You kind of had an idea of what they were going through. Did that help you, or do you feel like that experience is different now than maybe it was when you were growing up, or what do you think about that?
That's a really good question, Leanna. I think yes and no. So I think one of the really good things that happened as a result of, me growing up in this way and experiencing mobility in my early childhood was that there were a few things that I was very used to when it came time to parenting my own kids. And I don't know if I mentioned, I have 3 children born in 3 different countries, but that's a whole other thing. But so like one of the things I think which is important to point out is that I grew up bilingually. And for me, this was the norm. I just took it for granted that it's the norm to speak one language with your family inside your home, and then it's normal to speak and switch into a different language when you step outside of your home and you're speaking with neighbors or friends or teachers or other people. So that's how I grew up. In my Pakistani family, we spoke Urdu inside our home, and then we'd speak English outside in New York with other people. And for me, I just thought this was the norm. So I didn't realize what a big advantage it was back then to be growing up bilingually and then to have that kind of exposure, because I know that a lot of bilingual people would probably be able to relate to it, but when you switch languages, you almost switch personalities, right? You become a different person, or you become a different version of yourself. So this was something that was very much the norm for me, and I had a big appreciation for learning languages. And of course, this comes a lot in handy now that I'm raising my own third culture kids, because there was never a moment of doubt in my mind that I wouldn't raise them with multiple languages. There was never me questioning that. I knew it's hard and I knew it's going to be challenging, and it has been, this uphill, process where, you've got your ups and downs, right? But I never questioned the science behind it, the reasoning behind it, the motivations behind it, because for me, it seemed like the most natural thing to do. Of course, the difference is that now not only do I have 2 languages, but my husband brought in 2 languages of his own. He's a native speaker of German and Italian. So when we got married, we had 4 native languages. And of course, the tricky part that I had to figure out was, and he had to figure out, was how do we, come up with a strategy for making sure we can pass on our languages to our children, plus the community language, because of course we were always moving from one country to another. So there were always at least 5 languages to consider at any given point. And so it became a little bit more complex. But I think another difference in terms of back then and now, which I'm very grateful for, is that there's so much more research, there's so much more awareness, and there's so many more resources on third culture kids and third culture kid literature, and literature on, growing up with many languages, multiple homes. So it's a lot easier to access, I think, information today than it was back then in the 80s. So I think that's definitely a change in terms of me being a TCK back then and now raising my own.
You're a little bit younger than I am, so I don't know if this applies exactly, but I would also think maybe the internet might help as you change countries, that it's maybe a little bit, at least a little bit easier to stay in touch with people from where you left. Do you think that makes it easier than when you were a kid, or maybe you already had some of that when you were a teenager? I'm not sure.
No, definitely. I mean, there was even no email back then. I mean, it's a huge difference. So I think absolutely technology, and I know that technology can be this, let's not open the Pandora's box, but I mean, I think given all of its, it can definitely have huge advantages when you are moving and you do want to stay in touch with your communities that you have been a part of. So I definitely do agree with you that that's a big difference in today.
Well, I want to dive into exactly how your family has come up with how you do navigate all these languages and cultures. But first, I have something I'm really curious about, which is how you went from, you have a background in economic development, you worked for a long time in the corporate world, and now it seems like you've done this total shift to writing, because you have your blog, of course, and you have your own books that you've published, then you also do a lot of freelance writing. I know you're a speaker at conferences and so on. Does that feel like a big shift to you, or was that kind of, was there some natural progression there? I know a lot of people tend to do like a career shift when they have kids. What was that like for you?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I think I'll be very honest with you. I really struggled to keep my career going at the same time as moving from one country to the next. And then, of course, having children as well. I think any, family could relate to that. It's really hard. So for anyone who's listening, I totally, I've been there and I really struggled through it. But yes, my academic background, my degrees are in economics and economic development and in political science, and that's how I did start my career. I spent most of my 20s in a corporate career working for investment banks and chambers of commerce and working as an economist in oil trading. So that was definitely my background. But interestingly enough, writing was always something I was drawn to and wanted to do. It was already one of my life goals to be able to publish a book by the time I was 30, although that didn't quite happen. Few years, behind track. But I think the interesting thing was back then I was doing a lot more business writing, and I even co-authored a book with my economics professor from my college in the US. I mean, it's not a book you're going to find if you go to Barnes and Noble. It's a very academic book, like they use it as a resource for seminars and lectures at university. So but the writing was always there. But it wasn't until I moved to Singapore in 2012, 5 months pregnant with baby number 1 and unemployed, that I saw my husband going off on his first day of his new job. We were at the hotel having breakfast, and then he grabbed his, laptop case and said, well, bye, I'm off. And that's when the realization struck me that I had no job to go to, nowhere to be, nothing really to do. I mean, I was there in a new country, and that's when I asked myself, what do I want to do? And quite honestly, the answer was, it felt scary, but I also think living abroad is this amazing, amazing chance to really grab the opportunity and do something you've always wanted to do, but maybe haven't had the time, maybe haven't had the courage, maybe haven't had, the conviction to follow through. And so as scary as it is to make a big career change, that's what I ended up doing. I realized I did want to write professionally, and I switched to full-time writing. I started off by travel writing because we were living in Singapore, so travel was my way to get my foot in through the door. And it wasn't until we moved to Dubai in 2014 that I actually set up my own blog to really write about the kind of issues that I felt were top of the mind, not just for me, but for other families who were living this life on the move, such as moving, migration, and constant change of our identities as we add another place, another culture, another language, to our own psyche. And so that's when I started really writing about these topics close to my heart.
I love it. And for those that maybe aren't as familiar, that the name of the blog is so perfect. And then we moved to, because it captures so beautifully. And then we moved here, and then we moved there, and it's a wonderful blog. And how did that transition into writing a book? Or why don't we just go ahead and talk about the book, The Messy Mobile Life? And you said so what does that mean, a messy mobile life? Why did you use that idea to talk about, the challenges and how things can be, and then how does it help guide people through all this culture and language mix that people are kind of coming up with what your own family, I don't know what you call it, family culture would look like, especially, well, we can talk about that later, the tool that you've come up with about that, but.
Yeah, sure. I think, so your first question was, how did this book come about being? To be quite honest, I was just sitting one day feeding my kids dinner when I got a call from a reporter who turned out to be a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And Leanna, in my corporate career, the Wall Street Journal never called me then, but now that I was an expat writer, suddenly they were cold calling me. So don't put your phone number on LinkedIn if you don't want reporters to call you. But they had, just come across my blog, and they were writing an article on what it's like to live abroad and move abroad with, your family and your kids. And so they were just looking to get a quote from me to put in that article. And I thought I gave what was a good quote, but then the next question was, have you written a book on this topic? And I had to say no, because the book was still in my head at the time. This was 2017. And you know when you get that sinking feeling when you hang up and you're like, I don't think my quote's gonna make that article. But sometimes we need that push, and rejection, or this could be a good wake-up call, when you really realize this is something I really want to do. I really do want to put my expertise out there for people to be able to read it, because no one can read it if it's still in your head, right? And so that was the push to write this book. And the idea had already been germinating in my mind, but like most people, I doubted myself. I wasn't sure if I could do it. I had a husband who was traveling a lot, and I was almost solo parenting, much of the time. So it felt very overwhelming to now try and write a book. But I think the important thing I learned was that you don't need to do it all by yourself. And as long as you can ask the right people for help, like no one says you've got to figure it all out by yourself, So I gave myself permission to make mistakes, to learn on the go. And that's how I got started. So I started writing this messy mobile life at the end of 2017. In 2018, I realized that I wanted to include not just my family, but other families as well. So in fact, Multicultural Kid Blog was one of the amazing resources where I heard from so many other multicultural families as well, who shared their learnings and their stories. And that's how we learn from one another. So I included all of that in the book, because in the book, what I did was focus on three main messy factors. But before I come to that, I just want to answer your question as to why does this life get so messy? I think that's such a great question just to answer. And I think the answer is that when you leave the comfort of the familiar, of course your life is going to feel messy on many, many days. I mean, I think a lot of us go in with very unrealistic expectations, and we try to be super women abroad. And let me tell you, that is a hard job, and no one says we've got to do it, and no one's going to give you a gold medal if you do it. So the important thing is to take off our rose-tinted glasses and just admit it to ourselves and to one another, that a life on the move, when you move abroad, it is going to be messy, because nothing is going to be the same. So cut yourself some slack and recognize that, and know that not every day is going to go amazingly well. I think that's just part of being honest. And then the other part is, like, when you have got a good handle on living in your new country, you can figure out how your washing machine works. You can help your child with doing their homework in Mandarin, and you know where to go get mozzarella from. And then it's time to move again, or to move back home, so you're in this constant phase of transition, and you need to develop the right tools. And what I found out through my research was that the main factors that me and many other families who I was researching and surveying were talking about three main things, and those are the three main things I focus on in the book. Number one, culture. Number two, language. And number three, mobility. And the thing is this, that, I was reading books, but normally the books, they focus on only one part of these things. Like either there will be a book on raising third culture kids, or there's a book on raising a bilingual child, or there's a book on being in a cross-cultural marriage. And I was just thinking to myself, where's all the real, honest to goodness advice of the next generation that we are raising with multiple homes, multiple cultures, multiple languages, and multiple identities? And when I didn't find what I was looking for, I decided to just write it myself and include all of the messy factors, the messy goodness, the complicated bits, the multiracial families, the multi-ethnic families, you know, and put all of that in one umbrella and say, this is real life. Everything's coming at us in one go. What do we do? How do we do it? How do we move on and untangle each thread, so to speak?
Yeah, and I love that too, because I think you're giving permission to other people to like you say, if you just admit that that this kind of life is so messy, then it gives people permission to admit that theirs is messy too, and that's okay. And maybe that's just the nature of it, like you said, because it's always in motion and always fluid. Then how is it not going to be messy? But I was also wondering if you could give a shout out to some of the experts who, I know at least two of them we've already interviewed on this program. That's Annabelle and Ute. If you want to maybe shout out to them.
Annabelle and her family are mentioned in the book. They're in under the section on identity and culture, and also and language as well. And Ute Limacher-Riebold, who I know is also quite, you know, she's involved with MKB for a while. She's one of the experts who's also featured in the book. So she's one of the language experts who gives a lot of the advice of how to be raising a multilingual family. There's Maria Adcock from Bicultural Mama, and she's in the culture section. And I think it's important to point out, because even if, let's say, you're a multicultural family, but you haven't moved, I think you'll still be able to relate to the book. Or if you're a multilingual family, you'll still be able to relate to the book. And if you've moved around as well, you'll still be able to relate. So you can really pick and choose, you know, what resonates the most with you. And it was important for me to capture all these diverse experiences. Chantel is also in the book. She's raising her family back in Australia, her Australian family. So there are so many people from MKB who are, who I was very closely, you know, involved with, reading their work, you know, and so I was very happy that they contributed so much of their stories and their, you know, learnings and what they were also struggling with, right? Because in the book we talk about the challenges and the opportunities, because they both go hand in hand. So it's a very like vulnerable look at our lives, and I think that kind of honesty is hopefully like comforting to so many of us who might think that we're in this alone, or it's just me. But it's not, you know, we're all, it's so good to see we all struggle with so many of the same issues, right? So shout out to all these wonderful people and I also want to mention that the Multicultural Kid blog is also part of the resource guide at the end of the book. There's a big, you know, section on resources and where to read more and literature. So I think it definitely helped me a lot while I was writing the book. And I think that was that. And then, of course, your second question was, what did I create, which was the MOLA toolbox. Should we come to that? I'm happy to explain more about that, yes, because I don't know if people know what a MOLA is.
Yeah, that's what I say. Maybe you can explain what it's based on, the actual MOLA, like what that is, sure. And then how have you turned that idea into a tool to help families?
Quite simply, I was looking for a metaphor that would be as complex as the lives that we were leading, to sort of explain the depth, the layers, the complexity of a life on the move. And I stumbled upon the MOLA by accident, but as soon as I came across it, I knew this is what I wanted to write about. So in my book, the MOLA is two things. Number one, and I'm going to explain to you what a MOLA is, but number one, I use it as a concept, as a visual metaphor for what a family is creating when they are multicultural, when they are multilingual, when they are multimobile, or when they're all of the above, right? And secondly, I turn the MOLA not just into a visual metaphor, but also into a practical toolbox that, you know, your family can apply or my family can apply to sort of untangle all the messy threads. So let's start with what a mola is. A mola, quite simply, is a shirt that, you know, you or I would put on in the morning as we're getting dressed. A mola comes from South America, from modern day Panama and Colombia. So for anybody listening who is from there, please do tell us in the comments maybe. I always love to hear from people who, you know, are very familiar with molas. But what interested me the most is how a mola is made. So the Guna tribe makes the molas by hand. They stitch them by hand. And what they do is that they take several layers of brightly colored cloths and they start layering them one on top of the other. And then they take a thread that's so fine, it's practically invisible to the naked eye, and they start stitching and cutting and folding the sides. Eventually, they form, through the process of reverse applique, a design so that when you turn your mola over, it bears a very distinct design of the person who made it. And, you know, no two molas look alike. Your mola wouldn't look like mine, and mine wouldn't look like the next person. It's a very unique piece of art that reflects that person's cultural heritage, their journey, and who they are. And it's complex. Some layers shine through while others remain hidden, you know. So it's almost as if certain parts of our story are coming through and others remain hidden. You need to unfold them to see what is underneath. And I felt that this really spoke to me as someone who is a global nomad, because I feel there's so many layers to who we are, through our cultures, through our languages, through our nationalities, through what we speak and what we cook and what we eat and what we, you know, what traditions we follow, all of that. To others maybe, but that was the thing I found out. So I felt that anybody mobile life is actually busy stitching their mola. You know, we're unconsciously stitching our mola. We don't really know that that's what we're doing, but each time we've moved, we've added another layer to our design. And what I did was I ended up coming up with this framework. So in my book, our cultures are the fabric of our mola. Our languages are the thread that's uniting our mola. And all the places that we live in, all the places we move to, those are forming the layers of our design. So that is quite simply the framework, the mola framework.
I love that. And I'm so sorry. I feel like we could do another, at least an hour. I'm looking at the time, and if we go too far over, then Instagram doesn't want to let me save the video, and I'm make sure this is available for people. So we are going to have to end it there, but I'm going to make sure that we link to your book, and also to I know there's several reviews that I can link to that, and the text as well, so people can read more about it, because it's fascinating. And I'll see if maybe I can find some instances of a mola that we could share in our stories, because I'm not familiar with it, but it's such a beautiful metaphor. I love how it helps people think through, like you say, all the different layers and things that are hidden and things that are showing. And it also helps you feel like when things are messy, that there's still a pattern, and there's still you're still expressing yourself, even if you feel like you're just surviving. It's still coming through.
I think, and that's a good note to end it on, because I feel like through your mola, you are stitching your own unique design. And I think knowing that gives us so much comfort. And, you know, it's such a empowering way to think about your journey and your story. And I know that so many in the multicultural community are great storytellers, you know, and I think this is a very creative way to express who we are and our stories, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Thanks for everybody who's watching. We'll be sharing it on Instagram and later on YouTube. So great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanna. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a good evening. Bye.